Hello, everybody. Okay, Crystal Griffith here. Welcome back for your daily digest of emotions, wisdom, and your body. For every day of 2021, for about 15 to 20 minutes, we will delve deeper into our emotions, their effects on our body, soul, and spirit. And why is that? Because emotions are body wisdom. You can't live without that wisdom. So here's your disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. I do not play one on TV, but I do have my master's in education, emotional trauma certifications, and inner healing accreditations, and a couple other goodies. So this is really for your education, edification, and encouragement. And I will throw this in because today I got certified as a 100X business coach. Super excited about that one today. Worked my buns off for that one. So I want to share that good news with you. Man, I can take your business and your emotions and your clients from this level to that level. Like, who doesn't want that, right? Super excited. Okay, so let's talk today about a specific word, which is your brain hemispheres. So all this week, we were really kind of delving a little more into the nuts and bolts of what your brain looks like to understand how it works with your emotions. So your brain hemispheres. Now, obviously, we all know there's two, right? So let's talk a little more about that. So though your mind and brain are two terms that are typically understood to mean the same thing when they're used in some colloquial senses, there is a difference between your mind and your brain. So I want to make sure that we have a clarity around that. There is some certainty around differences between the brain making up your physical matter while your mind is not made up of physical matter. You would think that would be obvious, wouldn't you? But you'd be surprised. To be more elaborate, the brain is made up of your cells, your blood vessels, your neuroplasty, and those nerves and neurotransmitters, as well as those hormones we talk about all the time, to name a few things. Your mind, well, it's nothing but the thought that resides in the brain. So when those thoughts and emotions begin to develop and then they live within the brain and that amygdala hijacks the frontal cortex that we've talked about before, that's when we're talking about those actual mind pieces. But those neural network connections are creating those emotions based in your mind. So apart from thoughts, your mind gives room to emotions, memories, and dreams as well. So the two hemispheres of the brain, you have the right and the left hemisphere. They function interdependently, just like your right and your left, right? Now that might be mirrored to you right now on the back, but I can click here or I can click here and I'm not clicking both at the same time. It doesn't, one's not dependent on the other. We can move independently of them. So each of them has a role to play, your left and right hemispheres, in processing the information, although there is some dominance in certain areas. So the process is called brain lateralization. The degree of brain lateralization is not the same in everyone. So we can't just say it's 50-50 left, right. It doesn't work that way because each individual person is radically different. So for example, for my kiddo, I guarantee you, she is a lot more creative than she is on the logical side sometimes. But then you ask her certain questions, she will jump over to that other side and it is black and white to the death. Forget the creativity. So everybody's different, and it's also going to depend on what you're walking through in that moment. So each hemisphere of your brain has a role to play in the processing of information as well, which could be more dominant in other areas also. Now, let's talk just real briefly about what comes out in the left and what comes out in the right. So on the left brain, left brain, analytical thought, detailed oriented perception, ordered sequencing, rational thought, verbal cues, cautiousness, planning, math and science, logic, right field vision, because it actually starts, crosses over the hemisphere, and comes to the opposite eye. Right-sided motor skills, same concept, starts, crosses over, comes down, and goes to that side of the body. Now, on the right side of the brain, you have intuitive thought, holistic perception, random sequencing, emotional thought, nonverbal, adventurousness, impulsivity, creativity. Isn't it interesting they're both on the same side? Writing, art, music, those are all those right brain items. Imagination and left field, because it starts, crosses over, and come out, right? Same for your motor skills, left-sided motor skills on the right hemisphere. So that's kind of your brain lateralization. So you understand what's on the left and what's on the right. Now, a person can actually be right-brained or left-brained. Now, what does that mean? That means that one side of the brain is dominant. The left brain dominant person, they're more methodical and analytical in nature. But the right brain dominant are more creative and artistic. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, that's my aunt, or oh, that's my uncle, or oh, that's my cousin. Yes, that could be absolutely true. But I want you to think of how to apply this information to you, right? Because oftentimes we have had such trauma happen in our lives, we can actually shut down parts of our brain. Yep, isn't that crazy? So that creativity, that vision casting, the dreaming part, all right brain, right? And so I want you to think about this for a second. If you walk through trauma, you want to have more control in your life. Well, control is logic. It's sequencing. That's left brain, which means you are then going to build that muscle of your left brain hemisphere a lot stronger, because for some reason, that right brain, that creativity, that freedom, that imagination, that creates a fear to the left brain because of the trauma. So your right brain then begins to shut down in a way that can still be reopened. That's the cool thing, right? So we can speak to it, and God has a plan for that right brain, and God has a plan for that creativity, or he wouldn't have installed it in us, right? So everybody has these. So a lot of people will come up and they'll go, oh, I'm just not creative. Don't believe that. First question I would go is, so when did you stop feeling like you were creative? And that will typically tell me pretty quickly when trauma happened. There's something that someone said to someone, or some direction that they received, even in school. Oftentimes, oh, let's color our flowers. Okay, everybody color your stem green, and the petals yellow, and the center brown, and the grass is green, and the rainbow goes in this order. The clouds are white. So we have these social constructs that we're actually teaching our kids to, but we miss the imagination piece. Make your flowers. What would a rainbow look like to you? What would a house look like to you? Where would you stay? I know some kids that would love to stay in a wolf den or maybe a cave, right? With the bears, right? So houses look different if we give them the opportunity to use imagination. Isn't that awesome? Now, let's talk a little more about this. So the two sides of your brain communicate with one another, and they do perform all vital bodily processes. Both the left and the right side of the brain look very much alike, but they too share some differences, especially in how they process that information. So you can see which pieces they're processing, but then also how they're processing changes just a little bit. So because the two sides of your brain process that information differently, they work together to keep your emotions in check. So here's the easy way to kind of wrap up all of this. We're going to still talk for a minute, but wrap up this in kind of one sentence, okay? Your right brain identifies, your left brain interprets. Yep, that's simple. Right brain identifies, left brain interprets. Now, the right brain identifies negative emotions like fear, anger, danger. Now remember, your right brain's the creative side, right? So they're picking up on all the nuances going on in the environment. That's the imagination key piece. If it then alerts the left brain, which it then decides what to do. So right brain goes, oh, danger alert. Left brain goes, oh, got to do something. What do you think the left brain then actually activates? If you said the amygdala, you've been paying attention over the last couple of weeks, activates the amygdala, which then hijacks the frontal cortex, which then activates the central nervous system. And now we have fight, flight, freeze, faint, or fawn. Now you understand how they're all beginning to work together, right? So if we're thinking about making logical decisions on how to act in response to fight, flight, freeze, or faint, or fawn, that is left brain. That's where that logic lives. That's where that sequencing lives. And now that decision is now controlling your central nervous system. The right hemisphere processes negative aspects that tend to also lead to withdrawal behaviors. So fear, disgust, avoidance, alertness, and determination. While the left hemisphere processes positive aspects of emotion, which leads to laughter, joy, happiness, pride, and anger. So what do you think about this? So we have the right brain with the imagination, right? And the right brain is on alert, looking for fear, anger, danger, right? All right, identifying negative emotions. And then kind of catches that there's something that's not quite right and then withdraws while it activates the left to make a logical decision. And in that logical decision, activates the central nervous system, the amygdala, all of those fun things, and then makes a logical decision for fight, flight, freeze, or flight. Now, here's the cool part. But the left is also processing a way to almost dismiss the right side. Because if you think about it, the left side is really looking at approaching behaviors. They're the ones that are the greeters at church, so to speak, right? And they're the ones with the laughter, the joy, the happiness, the pride, and the anger. Now, that anger can fuel your central nervous system when it's in fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And now that's what you need, right? Because you either got to stay and fight, you got to run, you got to freeze, you got to faint. You've got a lot of options there. So just kind of trying to put all of this together for you. So left-handers often show the opposite pattern. Here's your kink. You thought we were doing really well, right? There's always one thing, right? So your left-handers, like the ones who write with the left, but interestingly enough, use a mouse on the keyboard with the right. Did you know that you can actually change that to your left hand? A lot of people don't know that. So left-handers show the opposite pattern. They approach motivation, and it's associated with greater activity in the right hemisphere. So left-handers who should use approaching behaviors with the left hemisphere, but remember that motor skill comes from the right side, doesn't it? It comes up, crosses over, and goes out. Motor skill to the left side of your body. So those left-handers who have that skill set rooted in the right hemisphere will also tend to show greater activity in the right hemisphere for approaching behaviors. Isn't that fascinating? So it doesn't just swap them, it just creates a greater activity in it. So now the right side also has the negative aspects of withdrawal behaviors and a bigger section of emotion for approaching behaviors. Man, we are complicated, amazing creatures, aren't we, guys? The location of people's neural systems for emotion really depends on whether they're left-handed or right-handed or somewhere in between. And that's what the research shows, which doesn't sound very like set in stone, does it? So maybe you've met somebody who can write with their right, write with their left, bat with their right, bat with their left. People can do some of those things. My kiddo is actually a right-hander, but she's left eye dominant for archery, which is pretty rare. And she's pretty spot on with that archery too. It's kind of neat. So here is something kind of really interesting. To treat depression and anxiety disorders. Now remember, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. I'm just giving you this information for edification and education and encouragement, okay? So to treat depression and anxiety disorders, brain stimulation is used to increase the neural activity in the patient's left hemisphere, long to be believed as that approach hemisphere, right? So if we have people who have a higher severity of anxiety and depression, they would stimulate the left side of the brain so it then can activate better the approaching behaviors, which are joy, peace, happiness, pride, anger, but also what? Logic, sequencing, executive processing. Isn't that really interesting? So Temple Grandin was one of the people that I recently got to have a sit down conversation with during an interview process that I was on that summit last weekend. And she mentioned something I thought was fascinating. She actually has had her brain scanned and her anxiety has been pretty off the chart. She'll be quick to tell you this. So I'm not sharing anything that she shared personally. It was something she shared with all of us out for the public, and it's in multiple of her books. She had her brain scanned, and when she did, this particular scan that scanned her brain actually showed an extremely large fear center, like bigger than the normal average, which would explain the anxiety-driven disorder. Isn't that interesting? So I think we should all rush out and get our brain scan and see what our fear center looks like. What do you think? Anybody in with me? So let's look a little deeper about the characteristics and functions of the left brain and the right brain. So the left brain, remember, sequential, logical, executive processing, okay, has the ability to understand the sum of any situation and look at things from it. They can see the whole sum of all the moving parts, right? Not just the individual parts. It involves the movement of large muscles, such as walking. It plays an important role in maintaining balance. It is responsible for nonverbal communications. Now, you heard me say earlier, the right side was nonverbal, which meant it was closed off communications. But this left side is actually responsible for the actual nonverbal communications. So if you are learning American Sign Language, then your left brain is actually dominant in that moment over your right brain. I'm telling you, this stuff is so cool, isn't it? Your left brain can also sense smell, taste, and sound. It is responsible for emotional functions. So even though they're on both sides, it's responsible because remember, you have the right side, it's looking for the danger. It then tells the left brain, hey, I got something going on over here. Left brain picks up and goes, here's going to be my response. The response is also not just a physical response, but an emotional response. Boy, that left brain's pretty important, isn't it? It regulates avoidance behavior. I love this. So it basically regulates the right side of your brain. So we need to treat our left side of our brains very nicely, shouldn't we? It controls your immune system. It is also in charge of involuntary bodily functions like digestion, the beating of the heart, and breathing. It's stimulated by new experiences, and it affects the person's ability to pay attention to details. I'm pretty sure that part of my brain is like way big. It's also fine motor skills. It converts sounds to language and translates meaning. So for those who may have nonverbal kiddos, it really makes you kind of wonder if there's a way to stimulate the left side of the brain for that language piece. And there's so much to that. There's so many nuances to that. Like, it's not just a matter of stimulate that side of your brain. I mean, like, there's so much to it, right? But it really does make you kind of question and wonder and think about opportunities and solutions to some of the things that we've walked through. Now, what about the right side? So this is your functions and characteristics of your right brain. It allows young children to grasp and understand the concept of more versus less. Why would that be important? Can you imagine not understanding more versus less? That affects everything that we do. The right hemisphere of the brain is responsible for some of the cognitive functions, such as attention, processing of visual shapes and patterns, emotions, which we've talked about, those actual, ones that are coming in with fear and danger, right? Verbal ambiguity and implied meanings. So especially for our kiddos on the ASD, it would be fascinating to be able to go into their brain and take pictures in such a way that would tell us, just like we saw with Temple Grandin, that she has this larger fear center in her brain, right? But to go, okay, so our kiddos on the spectrum, they really don't get implied meaning oftentimes. And I would probably tell you 9 out of 10 don't. And so what would that look like in their brain, right? Is it so much smaller, or is it the same size and just not being used? Maybe it's just not being let up. Maybe it's just the neurotransmitters are not making an activation to that area of the brain. Man, there's so much to this, right? Children below 3 years old are predominantly governed by the right brain. That's where that imagination comes in with our little kiddos. Man, we got to stimulate that more, don't we? Now, what does the Bible actually say about the brain? It actually doesn't. But it does mention the mind 95 times. That makes it pretty important, actually. So Philippians 2:5, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. Daniel 2:30, but as for me, the mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your mind. And then Philippians 2:2, complete my joy being of the same mind, having the same love, and being in full accord of one mind. So, how are you going to use this new information about your two hemispheres? Are you more left brain or right brain? And remember, wisdom is not just the hearing, but the application and the understanding of what you have heard. So your three questions. How has your brain been showing up in your life? Are you more right or left? Do you find yourself in avoidant situations, or do you find yourself in approaching situations? That will tell you left or right there. But then again, you've got the caveat that if you're a left-hander, you could have more on both sides on the right. I just love us. We're just so amazing. How has your brain been showing up, positive or negative? I want to give you hope and encouragement. Brain fog does not have to be forever. And if you are experiencing brain fog and you're going, I can't even absorb half of what you say half the time, would you contact me, please? I'm asking you to, because I really want to help you. I lived in brain fog for a really, really long time. Now, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but I'm going to say I came out of my brain fog probably a solid 85%. And that other 15% is typically when I have stayed up too late or there's a storm moving in on the Rockies. But I can probably tell you why I have brain fog pretty quickly. But I really want to encourage you guys, you don't have to live in brain fog. There are ways out of it. There are drug-free opportunities to be out of it. So it's not about popping a pill. And so I just want to give you encouragement and prayer if you would like it. Anytime for that, absolutely. But would you reach out to me? I would love to help you with the brain fog, because I want both of your hemispheres to be working, because that's what God designed you to be, right? And I actually know somebody who does not have the brain bridge. And we're going to talk about that later this week. And so what does that look like in your brain when you don't have the hemispheres actually interacting and talking to each other? That can be a whole nother ball of wax, right? So take those scriptures, put your name in them, personalize them, and remember, he wrote them just for you. So tomorrow's word, we're actually going to work on your cerebellum tomorrow. And this is really an interesting place that doesn't have a whole lot of information. And we know it does a lot with a little, but we're not quite sure what. So let's talk some more about that one tomorrow night. Join me again tomorrow for more emotions, wisdom in your body. Until then, register at K Crystal Griffith to receive more insights and your feelings wheel. And here is one caveat. So Thursday, we have a little medical thing going on. So I'm going to be real honest with you guys. God kind of downloads to me pretty much every day what I'm supposed to talk about that day or the next day. There's not a whole lot of lead time from him on this project. So I'm just going to say to you, Thursday, I might not have a live, but here's what I do promise you. Somewhere between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you'll get another one out of me. So we'll be all caught up, but it just might not happen on Thursday. Until then, I appreciate your prayers. I hope you guys have a fantastic night. And until then, sweet dreams. Night, guys.